Hello, my little Redux gremlins. We're here with another React Redux Toolkit video that's going to cover a particularly good question that we got asked on our YouTube channel here. This is highlighted and brought to my attention by my coworker, and I took the time to answer it in text-based form, and afterwards I was like, you know what? I think a video would be good for this because this actually brings up some cool things we could discuss here. So this is a question I received on this lovely video right here, asynchronously change Redux dispatches, a question that I got asked from a student in our Discord community from the Full Stack Bootcamp that prompted, that was a weird inhale, that prompted this video, that video and the thumbnail behind me, and that question we're looking at right here is prompting this video. So this individual has a split table view in terms of items at the top and a tab list at the bottom, a kind of master details where each tab displays details related to the currently selected items. They're giving me a little rundown on what their Redux state tree and components and features look like, and they ask for some advice or guidance on how to handle their problem because they thought this video would be the solution, but they were like, I actually don't know. Continuing on, I have an item slice with an item selected reducer in action. When an item is selected via a mouse click, I dispatch the item selected action. So that sounds like a controlled React dropdown, kind of like any kind of React controlled form input. It has a value tied to state and an on change that updates that state. It doesn't have to be stored in a global state format, but it does make sense if this individual has some global selectable list of items that may inform other views across his application. So continuing on. Action in the reducer updates the corresponding item entity as selected and deselects any previous selected item. Only one item can be selected at a time. So yeah, drop down, probably select something in a nav bar somewhere, and a separate view and maybe multiple separate views have to update with it. Makes sense so far. I have a separate slice for each tab, and each slice has an async thunk to receive its data from an API. That makes sense that when that component loads, it probably has to retrieve its data. So they select something from the dropdown, the appropriate view will load, and they have a thunk that will then snatch that information. That doesn't make sense to me. Now, if that information does not change very often, I would probably even go ahead and say prefetch all this data where possible. That way, your application doesn't have to fetch this data fresh on every dropdown. I mean, it could also be fetched the first time and then cached for speed purposes, and then you can avoid that problem altogether if you do have to do multiple refetching of data that's not changing all that much, you know? Like if I'm talking to like a movie API, you know, the information on each movie probably isn't changing all that often, so I don't have to worry about refetching constantly across one user's web session. Anyway, the currently selected tab should update its data when an item is selected. This is where I'm stuck. Okay, let's go. At first, I thought I could add an extra reducer to each tab slice and respond to item selected actions in order to update the data, but the Redux documentation says that side effects inside reducers are not allowed. So side effects will include things like running a logger inside of your reducer, trying to fetch other data inside of your reducer is not a good idea. The point of a reducer is that it's a pure function, right? Reducers are types of pure functions. Pure functions are functions that, given the same inputs, always give you the same outputs. And they have no side effects, meaning they don't change variables in a lexical scope or a global scope, right? They don't run like a logging method or software or whatever when also running their output. They don't run a fetch request as well as returning some data. Like those are the kind of side effects that they warn you about. And the biggest one that you want to not fall into trap-wise is that you do not want to be dispatching actions from within reducers. That's a big Redux no-no, and primarily the focus, like data fetching, asynchronous actions, which those are kind of the same thing, right? Data fetching is an asynchronous act. So asynchronous actions and dispatching actions from reducers are bad news bears. However, the extra reducer property of the createSlice function in Redux Toolkit's purpose is to indeed do what this individual said, which is respond to the item selected action in order to update the data. But if that means that they're running the fetch request from within that extra reducer, that is bad, and I'll show you how to get around that momentarily, as well as a cool trick that this individual may have been using in the first place. How can I handle this seemingly simple issue? Would you still advise using the solution in this video? The solution in this video from async chain Redux dispatches is not a bad idea. It's a very declarative. It's an imperative approach, not declarative. That'd be like React components. Very imperative approach saying do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. Like you give the explicit instructions daisy chained across a few async action calls, which is totally fine. That's a good way to do it. The reason I think my situation is slightly different is I don't need to chain asynchronous dispatches. So again, they are correct. They simply need to make sure that a select drop-down item has been updated in global state, which will trigger some kind of data fetch elsewhere. And I need multiple slices to respond to a click and update their data independently. Hope my ramblings make some sort of sense. I really appreciate any guidance you can give. Like I said, I already gave a text-based response down there, and after finished writing it out, I was like, you know what? Let's just make a whole video out of this content. So in the express interest of time, I'm not going to spend 15 minutes starting up a fresh create React app application and coding it all out. So I went ahead and made that fresh create React app. It's simply an app with an index.js, nothing magical to it. We're going to install Redux Toolkit and build out a quick demonstration about what this individual is trying to do to the best of my knowledge, and hopefully I will answer some questions and future questions that people trying to Google this might run into. All right, so like I said, my index is extraordinarily simple. My app is extraordinarily simple. I'm not going to focus on styling. Famous last words from me. But we're going to go ahead and stop this project and get some installations going. Let's go ahead and run Redux.js /toolkit to install RTK and React Redux, the library that ties your JavaScript state management code to your React View code. Let's go. Let's get this sucker back up and running. It's going to open a new tab annoyingly here. I did all the prep work, and I have to write everything out anyway. It's classic me, I suppose. Classic me. Anyway, let's go ahead and build out our first set of features. There's going to be two features here. I'll be using the JSON placeholder API, a classic one that I use not only in the curriculum, but in my videos as well, just because it's a very easy way to get a list of users that we can then mess with. So this is going to be forming our dropdown as well as our, what's it called? I have some sound panels that are about to fall off, which is why my eyes are wandering up here. I need to get stronger tape. Sorry, I should edit that out. No, I'm not going to bother. Okay, so yeah, we're going to use this information, this list of 10 users here, to build out our little dropdown and fetching the data for our individual pages that we're looking at here. So that's going to be the goal here, kind of emulating what I think this individual's issues are, and we're going to highlight some cool stuff along the way. So features a common pattern you'll see in Redux Toolkit applications. This is where you include subfolders for your slices and any components that are selecting or dispatching values to that slice. So rather than making folders, I'm making this very, very, very simple. So we're going to have two features. We're going to have the drop-down slice feature. That's going to be controlling the drop-down we're going to have here in its own component. So we'll have a dropdown.jsx that coincides with it. We'll be selecting and dispatching values to that slice from here. Typically, you move these into their own directory called dropdown so you can begin organizing, but this project is supposed to be simple. Famous last words. Then we're going to have a user slice that's going to, well, fetch the data of each individual user that coincides with our selected dropdown, okay? And that means we're going to have a user details page is going to be displaying some information here. Let's go ahead and build out the simple user JSX. Y'all know me. I like to just do a div h1 exported function component out like this. Keep it nice and simple for display purposes. Put it into my app, and we can begin coding some stuff out here. So instead of this simple h1, extra reducers, oh my. We're going to have our lovely drop-down component right here, and then I'm going to probably make another div under that that has my user component right here. No props being passed between them, as they are going to be provided by the global state of Redux. So from this features drop-down, copy-paste, user, copy-paste, auto-save, auto-refreshing, hot reload, all that fun stuff. Okay, cool. So we got that set up and good to go now. Now I need to actually code out my pieces of state. We're going to be using the import create slice from Redux Toolkit. We're going to have an initial state that's going to be, let's keep it an object in case I need to ever store anything more in it. It's very easy to select. Selected is going to be a string value of 0. Why am I defaulting to that? That's a dangerous move because this is technically considered truthy in JavaScript if I'm doing any kind of ternary or conditional rendering. String value 0. Trick question, it's not falsy, it's truthy, because any string other than this is truthy. This is falsy, this is truthy, this is truthy. It's a classic like beginner JavaScript interview question, like gotcha question. So the reason I'm doing this is because that's going to be the default value of my items or my options inside of my dropdown. And typically values in JSX HTML attributes are string values. So e.target.value when selecting something from our on change will always be a string. I'll just have to account for that in the long run, but it shouldn't matter. But yeah, that's why I'm defaulting to 0 there. It'll make more sense when I actually make the dropdown too. Let's go ahead and make my dropdown slice. Dropdown slicerino is a call to create slicerino. We're going to initialize state with initial state, initial state, give it a name of dropdown. And we'll have our singular reducer, which will be our select. This will be the select item action. So we'll be selecting a drop-down item or option. I think I'll call it select option. And from here, a reducer is just a function that takes 2 arguments, a state and an action, and returns a new state based off that. With RTK, we have immer, so we don't have to worry about state immutability. I can simply say the state.selected that we're looking at here should be whatever the action payload ends up being. And that's it. That's all we have to worry about right here. So we're going to write our export const. We're going to export out our select option action that will be destructured from the drop-down slice actions object, and then we're going to export by default the reducer from drop-down slice reducer. This comes from, if y'all know, the Redux ducks pattern, which I teach in my standalone React course that's available on our website if you check the description below. I have a whole section on RTK, vanilla Redux, all the stuff you would like to know, and the in-depth guts of it all. Let me tell you what now. All of it's in there, man. Yeah, so that's a reducer. That's our action. Let's go ahead and build out our store, because it's enough to get going here for demo purposes. I'm going to make a new store folder. Could have been just a file. Who knows? Whatever. Index.js. Let's go ahead and bring in the handy-dandy configure store method or function from, I don't need to be all that, Redux Toolkit. Let's go ahead and bring in my drop-down reducer. Man, I can't type today. Drop-down reducer. From the up1 directory, features, drop-down slash, and I'm going to say const store equals configure store, where we need to have at least a reducer property that will coincide with what we want here. So my state will be called drop-down, and the logic will be from the drop-down reducer that we've exported out. Let's go ahead and bring out the store. Bring out your dead. There we go. And into index.js, we're going to be importing the store from the store index directory and file. We're going to import our provider component from React Redux and nuke the app. So I can write my provider component, my app, my store prop with the store value that we've configured. And we should be good to go with some Redux action. Yeah, it recognizes Redux is there. Selected 0. We're set up and good to go, folks. Quick little boilerplate coding for y'all here. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so in dropdown, this is where I want it to generate my list of potential users. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous I have to fetch this information and then also fetch it for the other view, but we won't talk about that. What am I going to do here? I know what I'm going to do. Let's just go ahead and just code out a couple items here. So const options. I'm going to make an array of objects that I'm going to fill in with data at a later time. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and have it be as simple as this. Now, I know this looks overkill here, but I imagine this user, the person that asked the question, might have their options pre-coded out in a array of options like this. I know there are 10 users on 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 users on JSON placeholder documentation, so we are going to make 10 drop-down potential IDs. There we go. So let's say I have that information filled in here with their names as well. Who cares? I'm just going to worry about their IDs for my drop-down. So the H1 that says drop-down, I'm simply going to have it instead be a select tag, which inside of it, I'm going to have a default option that will currently show. Here we go. Stop it. And have a value of 0. So we can do string value 0 like that. And it's going to say, why is it angry at me? Oh, there we go. Right, there we go. Has a value of 0, hence so this is where we could do some sanitization to say, hey, if that Redux state is 0, don't fetch any information. If that Redux selected state is 0, or if this option value is 0, then don't set it and cause any kind of actions to happen. So you could write an if statement to prevent that by happening by checking for this value. Select an ID, something like that. There we go. So, that should generate a nice little selection for ourselves right there. That's not going to be an actual selectable option, but I'm going to map through my list of potential options by mapping through that array. And for each opt, I will say return an option element with the text being the ID. We'll say user and their ID. If you're mapping through anything in React, you also have to provide a unique key for these components. We're going to just use the ID because they are unique. And the value that will be tied to each option will be in its ID as well. That way, when I reference e.target.value, the event will be clicking on an option in the browser. The target will be the option I've clicked on in the dropdown, my select dropdown, and the .value will come from this, which will be their ID here. And just like a controlled React input, it is controlled by state. It is typically a string value and requires two main attributes on any kind of form element, which is a value and onChange. Now we could control that locally, but this user has their dropdown globally controlled by states. Let's go ahead and do that as well. So to do that, I'm going to replace this import React import with React Redux to bring in use dispatch and use selector. From there, I'm going to go ahead and import my type, my action creator as well from my features drop-down slice. That's called select option. There we go. Now, back down to the components. To control this via state, I will say our selected will come from a use selector. Look at my global state, find the selected. Did I call it selected? I like how I already forgot what it was. State.dropdown.selected, I'm pretty sure is what it's supposed to be. Dropdown.selected. Yeah, I'm stupid. There we go. State.dropdown.selected. That way I have drilled it down to the lowest possible selected value I can for state here. Selected should be the value on this input. It's going to represent what the currently selected value is. Then I need to provide an onChange, which needs to be as simple as the following. Just simply capture the event after the click occurs, and it should be fed into my use dispatch function. So not into my use dispatch, but rather we're going to dispatch an action here. So dispatch. Call my use dispatch hook. I love these things compared to the old way of doing stuff like map state to props and stuff like that. I'm so glad hooks are a thing now. And we're going to dispatch that select option action and pass in an action payload of the e.target.value. And that should be all we need to do to make this a controlled React element. There we go. Yeah, it recognizes we're passing in an action with that, an action with a payload and getting set to state here. So, okay, here is what this user could possibly do and what they were talking about in their code. So let's say this user slice, which I haven't coded out yet. I should have coded this out before the video, but it is. I have to explain it either way, right? We'll say this is called the info that starts as null, so I can do like a conditional render if I need to. We're going to call this, instead of drop-down slash, we're going to call it the user slice. Name, user. I don't have any reducers as of yet, so let's go ahead and merc that. Remove my exported actions. I have none yet. And let's go ahead and add this to my store so I don't forget that part, right? So we're going to change this to user reducer from user slice, copy paste, and change this to user : user reducer with a comma to make sure we have the correct syntax. There we go. Just wanted to add it to my store as fast as possible here. Since I've already wasted 20 minutes just doing setup on code here. And we're going to say that the user info is going to be displayed only if that user value exists. So from React Redux, I'll bring in my use selector, and I will say const data. We'll call it data or something like that, or info, I think is what I called it, from use selector. Now, again, this is a variable. It could just be easily called pizza. I'm just trying to be somewhat consistent here with my variable naming. Look in the global state, state.user.info, and select that smallest piece of state. And we'll say that we're not going to render the div if info is null. So if info is null, if it's not null, then we're going to safely display that div with the user's info in it. Now, when I fetch this data from JSON placeholder, it'll be JSON data and objects are not valid as React children. So I'm simply going to cheese it by stringifying it and calling it a day, maybe like inside of a paragraph tag or something. Here we go. I know this is messy. Hold on. Boom. Okay, yeah. So like I said, as long as it's not null, I'll render the information and stringifying it into a paragraph tag inside of a div when I actually have it selected, okay? But at the moment, there's no logic for that to happen. I just wanted to display that information. Yeah, so you can see it stringified the word null there. That's interesting. Because null is considered falsy. Opposite of falsy is true, which means it renders this. So, yeah, I don't know. I always reverse my logic that way. But there we go. Right now, there's nothing to display. So here we go. Yeah. This individual has this globally controlled dropdown state in their Redux Toolkit slices, and they were wondering, hey, would my other slices, my other pieces of state, be able to react to state changes brought about by another slice? And that is exactly what part of their question was, going, hey, couldn't extra reducers handle this? And the question is, oh yeah, it could. I'm going to add my extra reducers property here on my createSlice function. I'm going to be choosing to use the builder syntax for extra reducers. So basically, the purpose of extra reducers is to have a slice be able to listen to actions created outside of it. This could mean actions coming from the createAction function from Redux Toolkit, more than likely createAsyncThunk, being able to react to that action, or actions created by other reducers. That is the key component and understanding of extra reducers. That's a great use case for it here. So I can say, hey, builder, add a case to respond to a new action created from outside of this createSlice function. And you might be wondering, well, Luke, which action are you responding to? It happens to be the select option action. Now, technically, this isn't a function, an action creator with payload. So in my user slice, I'm going to import that action creator from the appropriate file, dropdown slice, select option. Now, select option is the action creator and has a property called .type that is a string value of the action type we're looking to respond to, aka, there it shows it right there within TypeScript IntelliSense, dropdown / select option. Then the second arg to add case is our reducer that we want to run when this action is detected. So check this out. We're going to simply console log, okay, this is cool for debugging purposes, even though this is terrible code. That's technically a side effect, right? And nothing actually doing with state updates, but I want to show to y'all how awesome that is. So my user's slice is now responding to state changes via one dispatched action. It's almost like we can set up a global listener by simply having our extra reducers adding a case to listen to an option. So had that user, the person that asked the question in the video, should they choose to go this route, what they cannot do here is they cannot begin to fetch data. This would be running a side effect within a reducer and is not a good idea. The fact that it simply listens to an action type outside of this reducer is not a side effect. That's exactly what the extra reducers use case is built for. So dispatching something from within here is bad news bears. Fetching something from in here is also bad news bears. So that's why when I was reading that question that the user had at the beginning of the video, I said, hey, if you already have all your user information pre-fetched and stored in here, either from a session or a storage cache of some kind, or maybe when the application first load, you just fetch everything in the background right away so you don't have to do it later. If you have all your information already displaying here, all you would have to do is tell it to show that information when this case happens, right? But that means that, watch this. So, at the moment, it's no value here, which is what it is. But, let's just console log that action payload. And like I said, it should be listening to the exact same action type from that other reducer we created, right? So we can still get the action payload here. So again, you don't want to fetch here, but let's say they had a list of users' information here they're just trying to display. You could always do something with that by saying state.info equals, it'd be like state .users in their action payload to find that user's like key or ID in the object somewhere. If you had that available, if you just had that information just set and ready to go, this is all you'd have to do is say, hey, display this info for that particular tab or view or page or whatever you have here. So for now, let's just go ahead and set the action payload to be whatever the state info will be the action payload from that dropdown, just so y'all can see it happen kind of in real time, right? So as I select something from the dropdown, we have one dispatch action now informing one or more, as many as you may need. This could be even a global change. Like you could have one dispatch action affect 6 different slices, and they're still pure functions because they still simply update their state and return a new state. And that's all they do, right? That's not a side effect. That's what the use case of extra reducers is for. But I doubt their problem was this simple from the YouTube comment, which I hopefully they reply to that one, and also comment below this one with any additional information that I could help clarify here. Because here's the next step we're actually going to do. This right here, I think is super cool to know, which is why I wanted to include it, which is why I ultimately ended up making this entire video for this one subject, where you can now have your actions made by other reducers be listenable in other reducers from that action. This is so hard to say without saying the word action so many times. So now we can respond to actions outside of this reducer, which is very, very cool to know, okay? But more than likely, this is not what that individual meant to happen. So we have a couple of choices here. So I'm going to say that I need to make a fetch request, a data request to an API, very common use case. And that is asynchronous code, and I need it to happen as that. I want the dropdown to update and to fetch that data every single time I change my dropdown, which I think is what that user is saying they need to be doing. So let's go ahead and show how I would tackle that particular problem. I'm going to create an async thunk function here. I'm going to import it in and use it. So we're going to say const get user data by ID. That's a very on the nose name, I know, but hey, that's the purpose of it here. And it's going to be a call to create async thunk. The first arg to it will be our action name. We're going to call it the users / get user data by ID. Action type is right there. And then from there, we're going to have our thunk run here. Now, the really cool part about thunks is that they have 2 things that we could do with them, right? So let me make sure I'm not going to mess up my terms here. Just Googling a quick note about it. Oh yeah, we're going to be using async logic as well, so I should include the async keyword there. And the first argument to create async thunk, again, this is what I was trying to Google, but it's not showing me the documentation for it for some reason. How dare you? Docs, maybe? I'm getting everything but the Redux Toolkit documentation in my Google search here. This is really, really weird. I can't remember if it's the first or second argument to create async thunk that is the ThunkAPI, because that's what's going to... This whole thing hinders on the fact that I get that part right. Okay, cool. So the first part is going to be our payload, whatever we're carrying into this async thunk as our argument, right? So we're going to call it the user ID or ID value that's going to be passed in as an argument via this action. And we also have access to, as this second argument, we have access to something called the ThunkAPI. Again, this is a function argument that's behind my head that you can call whatever you want, right? That's it. So this is your arguments you're passing in, aka action payloads, basically. This is your action type as the first arg, and then the second argument in this callback function is the... I could scroll down. I'm so stupid. I'd scroll down. Yeah, so the ThunkAPI allows us to do 2 main things from a Redux store. Because remember, at the end of the day, the Redux store is just JavaScript code. The ThunkAPI has 2 things you are going to be using on it for various use cases. GetState. This gets the state of the entire store as it currently stands, meaning I could go find my dropdown selected value to do some logic based on that. Or I can say, if it's 0, return nothing because I don't want this to run, for example. So I could say if this value is a string value of 0, if statement return nothing or return null because, well, that's not a option that I want to be fetching, because fetching 0 on the JSON placeholder API means we get nothing in return. So you can get the state of your store as it currently stands, remember, not what it's going to be, what it currently is, and do something with it. The other thing you could do with getState, well, because the Thunk API represents what's in the store, or it represents the store itself, which means we can dispatch methods to our store. So yeah, that's all you have to do. So I could say, hey, Thunk API, dispatch the select option action with the ID I pass in here. So this ID will be daisy chained in and passed into my Thunk API dispatch select option ID. That will happen, update the state, and as that's happening, I can also say make a fetch request to /users/ and concatenate the ID at the end there. That should fetch that data. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. JSON placeholder.typeacode.com. That's what it was. /users/ and the ID we're looking to fetch. After that response comes back okay, we should be able to parse it into some user data. Await res.json. Then we're going to say return the user data from this async thunk. So that's something that you can do right here, and I think more akin to what that user's looking for. So instead of adding the select option type in our builder add case, we're instead going to change this to say get user data by ID and get that fulfilled type, because this createAsyncThunk returns 3 states, I believe, fulfilled, pending, or rejected, and we're going to only worry about the fulfilled state, which means that the async thunk has fully resolved what it's doing. So state.info is now going to be action.payload. The return value from our async thunk will be the action.payload right here, and that state.info should then be a truthy value, which means we should be able to now stringify a full user's information. So yeah, that is what I think this user would need to do to solve whatever their problem was. And this is the Redux way to properly do things. So let's go see if it ended up working or not. Select an ID, user 3, nothing changed. Congratulations, Luke, you've done nothing. Oh, because I forgot to actually change what the dispatch was, right? So right here, instead of dispatching select option, I need to export my get user by data by ID action and import it over yonder instead. Get user data ID, user slice, get user data by ID. So we are going to replace the select option type with get user data by ID, as that thunk should also set that state for me, and also at the same time fetch some user data to display here, and there you go. This is how we are now still controlling the dropdown from global state in the Redux store, and it informs everything. And we have a thunk that will simultaneously go and fetch that data and tell that reducer to then update. So again, you might be wondering, isn't this a side effect? And my understanding is no, because the async thunk is a function. It is a containing function to let asynchronous code finish. We are still synchronously calling a dispatch to an action to a reducer. That's not a side effect. This is still just a reducer receiving an action and updating its state synchronously, just like it should. This containing async thunk will then wait for this resolution, return that user data, and we have in our reducer synchronous code that simply updates the state once this return user data fires off. So this is not a side effect. This is the reducers still just run exactly what they should. They receive a type, they take state in an action, and return you a new state based on that action. Same thing for the dropdown. This action type is called. The function runs, state action, returns a new state. No side effects happen from within the reducers, because the createAsyncThunk is not the reducer. Again, remember, at the end of the day, it's a function. This thing is a function, a containing, a holding function to let asynchronous code finish and then dispatch synchronously once it's all done, and that's exactly what it does. So I think this is a solution that user is looking for. So thanks again for the of course, delete the YouTube video. Thanks for the great question you had in the comments, by the way. Hopefully this clarified it. If not, leave a comment. We'll comment your question below, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I'll be happy to make more and more videos. Like, I can I have several playlists currently going, but being able to take a break from them and answer some actual user content here is what I like to do as well to help y'all out, because, well, we're all on this journey to learn together is the important part to remember. So where's my favorite user? Irvin Hell. Let's go, Irvin. Yeah, so hopefully that answered it. And if you have any other questions, I'll see you in the comments at a later time. Peace.